I'm going to try something here. I don't know if this will work or not, but if you would you turn all the house lights on for just a minute? You know how we do a banner like this right here? We have a banner of the new series, and so what I would like to do, because the next series after Father's Day is called "The Story of Us." So, and I don't know if this will even work. No, never mind, it won't because of those lights. I was going to take a picture of us and then have it as the backdrop for the banner, but those lights wash it out. So never mind, turn those lights back off and forget I ever said that. Hey, great to see you this morning. Welcome to Christ the King. Great to have you here. Yeah, it's interesting as Chip was talking about the church alive on the other side of the borders. Man, I was convicted a little bit about not praying for the world church as much as and as often as I probably should. I was just in Yakima at our Christ the King this week, spending some time with Sam Middlebrook, who has pretty much an inner city church in Yakima, which is one of the most violent places in the United States right now. I don't know if you know that or not. So keep him in prayer, if you would. He's had to protect himself several times in pretty scary situations, and he doesn't want to go anywhere else. He grew up in inner city church in Houston, and he's a committed man. You'd really like this guy. I had to bring him down sometime. He's a pretty amazing dude. So welcome to all of those who are watching live stream. I know that is a growing audience. I just want to remind you, I'm not a televangelist, even though I look like one. I am waiting for my skunk stripe to show up so that I can have that going for me, because that's what it used to be in the 70s. But anyway, I appreciate all of your faithfulness. I appreciate the faithfulness of you here who financially make it possible for those all around the world who are tuning in with us. And then if you can help us out around the world, there are ways that you can do that. I think we have a way to do that now on Facebook, and you can get on our website and do that as well. We want to encourage that. We've been in this series that a couple weeks ago I said to Patty, man, I'm glad I'm preaching on Job. Glad I'm talking about this, because I just need this right now. And man, there's so many things that I'm learning, and there's so much that's good for me. We wrap it up today, but man, I've just been, privileged to look behind the curtain at this conversation between good and evil, between God and Satan, between the darkness and the light that dispels the darkness, and how the enemy has so many devious, horrible, insidious plans to take us out of the game, out of life, out of joy, and how, nothing happens without it going through the hands of God. And even when things happen that are really horrible, it's not because God is horrible, it's because life is hard. I mean, everyone has said it from Jesus on. Life is hard. In this world you will have troubles. One of the reasons why we look forward to heaven is because we know this isn't it right here. And we watch this conversation, we watch everything unfold in the life of Job, where he loses everything, his family, his health, his businesses, his livestock, really his friends, his wife takes off. I mean, nothing could be worse. But then we get to this place where I ended last week, where Job finally comes into a conversation with God. And there are these 77 verses where God doesn't give him any answers, just asks 77 questions. And Job is in this place where he changes his mind just because of the questions that God is asking him. And so he changes his mind about God. And that's really, I think, of all the multiple themes throughout this story, I think this might be the biggest. I know for me it is, and I know that in our future, as we're talking about what a discipleship walk is going to look like at Christ the King here in Nampa, and I think even broader than here in Nampa, it starts with changing your mind about God, turning from who you have made him out to be to who he actually is. And we ended talking about that last week. And what happens is when you change your thinking about him, because there have been so many influences, really not good influences, and how we thought of him, when that changes, when we get an accurate sense of who God really is, then we have the opportunity to do what Job has done, and that's to change our mind about who we are. And when you change your mind then about who you are based on who he is, you start seeing others different. And when you start seeing others different, you start noticing the things God has given you as things that are his to be used in a multiple variety of ways. And he, because he loves you so much, will direct you into what that looks like. So that's a really quick way of getting us up to this very last part of Job, which we're all waiting for, which is the reward, where he's been restored. And now in chapter 42, in verse 7, it says, after the Lord had finished speaking to Job, he said to one of Job's friends, Eliphaz the Temanite, he said, I'm angry with you. Words I don't want to ever hear from him. Hey, I'm upset at you. I don't like hearing that from my wife. I don't ever want to hear that from God. But he says, I'm upset at you and your two friends because you haven't represented me right. You haven't represented me well. You're making people think wrong thoughts about me. You've not spoken accurately about me. And then, as my servant Job has, ouch, can you feel the sting? Feel a little touch of the salt in the wound in that situation? The basic thing that God is trying to get across at the end of the story and at the end of all of our difficult times is what you'll find in point number 1 if you're taking notes this morning, and that is God wants my view of him to be restored, to be restored. See, if your view of God is wrong, then everything about how you do life will be wrong. It just will. It can't not be wrong. How you live out in your projection of good and evil and what relationships are like and what everything is supposed to be about will all be tainted if your view of God is wrong. And God, and one of the things that he's showing us right here at the very end when you're waiting for the great climax of God's love and restoration is you see that he's not willing to let us be like Job, And I mean, let this be just about Job. Because he knows that everyone is involved when they're involved. See, what he wants us to know here is that he sees this big picture about all of the relational exchange and miscues so that it's not just about Job, it's about everybody that's involved in this story, which, we don't like that really. I'd rather it be about either all me or all that guy. I don't want it to be about us because that's just a lot of work and vulnerability. And who loves to just be vulnerable, around people when they're hurting and they may like what you say, they may not like what you say. So there's just a couple of things about God and restoring your thinking towards him that I want you to consider this morning. And I have an A and a B for you. A is that God is compassionate and merciful as your Father. He is a compassionate, merciful dad. If you've never had a compassionate, merciful dad, then this is going to be a lot of work for you. You're going to have to push yourself into this theology, into this God knowledge. Yeah, there is this wrath. There is a wrath and justice God. We know that. But that is what he does. Don't confuse what he does with who he is. Because compassionate and merciful, it's who he is. He does not have a choice in being anything else from the heart because it is who he is. He isn't willing to let who he is be distorted because that ruins everything, and he knows that ruins everything. When you are in my job as a pastor, if you've ever been a pastor, I know there have been a couple, 3 of you out there that have been, you will see people who stop with God as the wrath of God. You see that happen all the time. In my job, when I go into a gathering, I did a wedding in Wenatchee yesterday. And the night before, there was really just a great gathering and party and people getting to know each other and everything. And I was introduced in my least favorite way of being introduced, which is, this is Pastor Rick. And you get to see what everyone thinks about God right in that moment, you know. Some people put their drink in their pocket, you know. Other people start thinking about, okay, what did I just say? What did I say? How did I say it? Did I say some stuff, you know? And this was a great event. I mean, there was a magistrate there. There was a retired general there from the Air Force. I mean, this was a quality group of people. So it wasn't typical, but typically people freak out when they find out I'm a pastor. And the reason they freak out when they find out I'm a pastor is because they see me as the voice of God, and their view of God is distorted. Their fear is, oh no, oh, this can't be good. God is looking on. He has seen me. He has heard me. He's evaluating me. I'm falling short somehow. It is their view. Now, some of you today evade God because that's your theology. I hope he's not mad at me. I hope I'm doing more good stuff than bad stuff because he's looking at me and he's weighing it, you know. It's what Job's three friends do. They misrepresent him. They just know that God is looking for people who are doing something wrong, and it's their job, and more than that, even their privilege, to show up alongside God so that they can have a snuff them out party. And as God holds the flamethrower, they're going to stand there, you know, as his support team, and they're going to watch as he torches everybody who's bad. You can hear what they're not saying out loud, you know, because here's what they're not saying out loud. If I can just find someone who is doing something wrong, then I'm okay because I'm better than them. Now, here's the funny thing about this. If you would ask those three guys, so do you think you're better than everyone else? They would have said, no. But it's how we act out of our view of God that causes us to do things and to say things and to judge people that in our mixed up minds causes us to put ourselves in a little better light with God. Well, at least I'm not them. I'm not doing what they're doing. At least I'm not ticking them off. And at times even we'll get mad at people because of their brokenness and their sin. We'll be really judgmental because we don't do that stuff. But we're the same kind of person. Absolutely the same kind of person. And our view of God is off. Some of us need to take Lamentations 3, verse 31 through 33, and just put it on something and read so that we can redo our thinking. Look at with me. For no one is cast off by the Lord forever. Though he brings grief, he will show compassion. So great is his unfailing love. Now you look at this. For he does not willingly, you see that word? Willingly bring affliction or grief to anyone. Good dads don't do that. Good dads don't look for their kids so that they can go pull out a belt and spank them. You know? Jesus came so that he could say this in the form of a question. Hey, let me tell you about my dad. You got to know my dad. You have a warped view of my dad. There's something amazing about my dad. He's a good, what? Father, yeah. So God is compassionate and he's merciful, and then B, under restoring our thoughts about him, this is a given by grace relationship. It's not a give to get relationship. God's goal isn't to make us wealthy. God's goal is to make us rich in relationship with him and with each other. That's his goal. Because this is important, because some people are on the performance treadmill trying to find favor with God. God does not keep score financially or behaviorally. He keeps score relationally. And for some of us, that's a huge concept that we just need to sit with and think about and talk to Him about and ponder. When I was pastoring in Redmond, Washington, years ago, I used to do this thing once a year called a 90-day money-back guarantee. Because in Malachi it says, if you would just trust God with the 10% of your income, He'll open up the floodgates and you'll let Him be God and He will do stuff for you because He's a good dad. Just because He's a good dad. It's just in there. And it's always hard to talk about because people are like, oh, there's the money talk. So I did this deal, 90-day money-back guarantee. I'm going to back God's promise out of Malachi 3. You tithe 10%, we'll put that 10% in an escrow account and hold it. And if you are worse off financially, you just let me know personally and we will refund your money. But if you're better off financially, we want to hear from you, Well, I felt like a used car salesman, but I didn't care. Because God was trustworthy. Then I had this woman who sent me a letter, and she goes, listen, I'm going to do the 90-day money-back guarantee. Here's a check, and it was a great big fat check. And she said, I'm addicted to cocaine. I've got these other addictions, and I've got this stuff going on in my life. I'm hoping this is going to help. And I sent her back her money and said, this actually wasn't about money. This was about being able to trust God with you. And the money part is actually just a symbolic thing that says, I'm all in, He's the Lord of my life, He's the Lord of everything. Because He's not keeping score financially, He's not keeping score behaviorally, He's keeping score relationally. Let's get together and talk about your relationship with God. And she was so mad she never came to church again. Now, I don't know about you, but if I ever had a pastor give me my money back, I'd probably go back again just because I'd wonder, what in the world is that about? This is a brand new thing here, right? Yeah. All of our connection with God is based on His unreasonable love towards us. It's crazy love, man. He's crazy in love with you, and you know what? There's not a thing you can do about it. There's not. However you respond, it will not change His love for you. Now, if you're like me, I hate to be misunderstood. In fact, I've worked really hard to not have an overdeveloped need of not being misunderstood. It's probably why I was so good at sales when I was a young kid. Because if you said no, I thought, well, you don't understand what I'm saying then. And I just kept going until it was like, what do we got to give this guy to get him out of here, And I was very, very, very successful in sales when I was a kid. I just hated to be misunderstood. So when who God is distorted, it makes God angry because He's worked so hard for you to understand who He is. And that really kind of scared these three boys, these friends of Job's. And so they're thinking, well, we were trying to get on God's side in the Snuff 'Em Out program and roast and toast Job. Looks like we're going to get roasted and toasted. Then look what happens. Verse 8. God says, so I want you to take 7 bulls, 7 rams, and go to my servant Job. What? Yeah, go to my servant Job, offer a burnt offering for you, for yourselves. And then my servant Job's going to pray for you. What? See, this is not going well. Everything they had in mind is slowly just falling apart in this conversation. Go to my servant Job. He's going to pray for you, and I'll accept his prayer on your behalf. And I'm not going to treat you as you deserve, for you have not spoken accurately about me as my servant Job has. That was a terrifying verse for them. That was a terrifying thing for them to hear. See, restoration with God, first of all, means Job has to be involved. So this wasn't so great for Job either, right? Being right with God isn't a mutually exclusive proposition. It always involves others. It does. You don't just get right with God all by yourself and like everything you lived and did didn't have any impact on anybody else. It always involves others. Now, God sets up the restoration of everyone who's involved in this thing at this point with an offering that has a very specific meaning. So in Hebrew, 7 is a very interesting number because 7 represents wholeness or something that is completed, completing the loop. So you have 7 days to create. God didn't need 7 days to create, 6 to create, 1 to rest. But 7 represents the completed project, the completeness of rounding the whole loop out and saying, this is it, and it's good. So he says to these guys, I want you to take 7 bulls, and then, you know what, let's do it again, and 7 rams. So I want you to do double duty on this one and complete the restoration of Job in the form of an offering with currency that really matters, which in the day was livestock. So he says he wants a burnt offering. Now there's a burnt offering and sin offering. Burnt offering says, God, I know I'm messed up from the inside out. I know that what is happening as a result of who I am is because of what's going on with my heart. A sin offering is about what I did because of what's going on in my heart. So both of those offerings are in the Old Testament. So basically he's saying, guys, here's what you need to do. You need to go to my servant and offer a burnt offering because you are so messed up inside. No, do 2 because you are so messed up inside. And I want you to have Job pray for you while you realize how messed up you are, and especially in how you're thinking and representing me. Now, it's interesting to me that in all of the process of all of this, as I have thought back and looked back at this, and I'd not thought about this before, maybe you've thought about this, Job was never prayed for by his buddies. Have you ever noticed that? That these 3 guys never prayed for Job. So here's what I want to say to you in this. You may not get it. You may not be able to help somebody. It may be bigger. I mean, I was on the phone last night driving back, talking to a guy whose whole life is all messed up, and I didn't have one answer for him other than you need to be able to have a relationship with God to make this thing look right. Let me pray for you. Let me pray for you. You can say, let me pray for you. Let's give this to God together. In all of my life, when I have said, can I pray for you, which is almost every day, I've only had one person say no. Because deep in the heart of man is this need to connect with God. So number 2, restoration with God always includes restoration with one another. It's not just about me. It's about me and you. So, verse 9. So Eliphaz the Temanite and Bildad the Shuhite and Zophar the Naamathite did as the Lord commanded, and the Lord accepted Job's prayer. So they had to, what kind of pie do you think they ate? Humble pie. Humility always means saying, you know what, I was wrong. Somewhere, you have been wrong, and it's impacted your view of who God is. Somewhere you have lived wrong, acted wrong, spoken wrong, and the enemy wants you to think that, well, it's because you're wrong. You're just not enough. But God wants your thinking about what all of that means in relationship with Him to be restored. And not just to Him, but to the people around you, you know. I've been struggling. Two weeks from this weekend on a Saturday, so 2 weeks from yesterday, Patty and I will be up in Redmond, Washington, where we started this church, a million years ago, 29 years ago. Last Easter, they had 7,800 people. This weekend, 2 weeks from yesterday, there will be 3 geographical conferences in the Free Methodist Church meeting together, and there will be a big ordination ceremony where people get their parchments, their credentials, meaning they've gone through all kinds of stuff, years and years of stuff. And there's 22 of them, and all their friends and family and delegates, and this place is going to be packed. And then they're going to give credentials back to people who have demonstrated that they're trustworthy and can hold those parchments again, those credentials again. Now, I've got credentials. I'm ordained in the Christ the King network. You know, they've asked me to be the national pastor. I am in a relationship with pastors every single week. I don't need to be ordained again. I don't need those credentials back. I don't need any of this, except that there's people that are going to be there that do, which means then so do I. You know, I realized this morning, just this morning, even yesterday, I was talking about this to some friends that are planning to be there. I was saying, I don't even know why I'm doing this. It's irritating to me. I don't know why. I don't know why. And just this morning, I realized that God wants to sync up some people. And that whatever it is that he's going to do is going to be about more than just me. And that I need to humble myself and let God do whatever it is that he's going to do, even if it doesn't make sense to me. Which takes us to point number 3. The cost of restoration is high. It is. I don't want to go up and stand in front of those people and do that in a church that I raised $12.5 million to build, that I started in my living room with my wife, who did nothing wrong, was to stand there with me, you know. It's high. Cost of restoration is high. And the higher the cost, the greater the reward. What is amazing is what Job does. So, Job prayed for his friends, and the Lord restored his fortunes. In fact, the Lord gave him twice as much as before. So he needs to pray for them as much as they need to be prayed for by him. And that means dropping your guard with the willingness to love again. And folks, if you've been stung a few times, that gets hard. And when you get older, it gets harder. I wonder what that prayer would have been like where Job prayed for those guys. What would you have said? God, if you'd just give me a moment to throat punch these boys, just so they know what it felt like. And then we'll get right down to business, you know. Wow. Well, he didn't. So what happens when you obey God to that point, where you pray for those who are your enemies, you love those who persecute you, where you see people as valuable as God does, and you don't try and figure out the consequence or the end of the game, you just walk into it as God asks you to walk. What happens is you end up with what we have as number 4, spiritual intimacy. Because in the evidence of restoration is always spiritual intimacy, and spiritual intimacy is deeper than any kind of intimacy known to humankind. It's the most important kind. Restoration changes things. It changed things for Job. Now, take a look. In verse 11, you'll get to see how it changed things. Then all his brothers, sisters, and former friends came. Now, at this point, I'm going, well, where were they? Which, that's a whole new level, isn't it? It's like, you know, I remember at that church that I'm going to, we had a huge, big capital campaign, raised $12 million, and a bunch of people went away. A couple years later, the church gets built, and those people showed up. It's like, hey, we're here, like they were here the week before, you know. I want to say, well, where were you when we were all paying the heavy price of getting this thing put together? I want to say that, but I don't say that because they are on their journey. And restoration is bigger than me. God made me to be a part of restoration. He did not make me to be a part of vengeance. I can't do that. Vengeance, the price of vengeance is way higher than the price of humility and restoration. Never forget that. Because God didn't engineer you and I for vengeance. He said it's whose? His. He said, vengeance is mine. but restoration is yours. Why would he do that? Because there's so much in it for you and for me. So all these guys show up. You're going, okay, wow, good to see you guys. And God bless them, they feasted with him in his home. Showed up for dinner, showed up for the big feast, and they consoled him, comforted him, a little late, I think, which caused a whole other kind of humility and acceptance. But they did that because of all the trials that they thought that the Lord had brought against them. Then each of them brought, if you look in the Hebrew, this basically what they did is they brought a chunk of silver. You know, they brought a bunch of silver and the nose ring, which is another whole thing, the gold nose ring. So the Lord blessed Job in the second half of his life even more than in the beginning. Because remember, in the beginning he had 7,000 sheep. Now he has 14,000. He had 3,000 camels in his transportation fleet. Now he has 6. He had 500 teams of oxen. Now he has 1,000. He had 500 female donkeys. Now he has 1,000. And he also gave 7 more sons and 3 more daughters. You go, well, he had 7 sons and 3 daughters. Well, he still does, doesn't he? Because they're all in heaven. So he multiplied the family. He gets the same family, except Mrs. Job doesn't show up. You see how much God loves him? Because Mrs. Job is not in on the action, but there must be a new Mrs. Job, which is really cool because he had a whole other family to celebrate with. So, number 5, you always have to do the hard work before the reward. So he had these daughters, these 3 daughters, and their names are really interesting. His first daughter's name is Jemima, which is dove because of the softness of the feathers. The second was Keziah, which is cinnamon. And the third is Kedin Hapuk, which actually means jar of eyeshadow, because they used eyeshadow around their eyes to make their eyes look bigger. So, you know, you had soft and the one who's fragrant and the one whose eyes are beautiful. In all of the land, no women were as lovely as the daughters of Job, and their fathers, you ready for this? This is where you gasp. If you have a gasp in you, this is where you do it. Their father put them into his will. Really? That's all you got? Some of you sounded like you had asthma just then. And their father put them into his will. Come on, this side is totally without oxygen. And their father put them into his will. Yes. Along with the brothers, you don't do that. You don't give an inheritance to the girls because they're not for that. They don't do the work in the fields. And you know what? They didn't earn it. The girls got what they didn't deserve. Sound familiar? You did. You got what you didn't earn or deserved. The ferocious, scandalous, endless love of God in spite of what you've done. Wow. Why did he do that? Well, he had a whole new perspective now because life is a grace give. Not gift, give. It's a grace give. That's what life is, giving grace, giving to people what they don't seem to deserve in our limited economy. And he could do that now because what he receives from God, he sees things from a God view. And this is what I want our church to be known for. Number 6, he received from God, now he gets to grace give. I want us to be a church that grace gives, that just gives grace because so much has been given to us, you know? Job lived 140 years, it says in verse 16. After that, living to be 4 generations of his children and grandchildren. Then he died an old man who lived a long, full life. The fruit of his restoration and the fruit of our restoration is the best years of your life. I don't care how old you are and what you've done and what's behind you. What is in front of you, if you're restored to God, will be the best years of your life. The New Testament equivalent of this is James 1:12. God blesses those who patiently endure testing and temptation, Afterward, they will receive the crown of life, the best life that God has promised to those who love him, which is number 7. If I get a right view of God, it's going to change my life. And if it changes my life, I'll see others differently and everything God's put into my hands differently. Now look, we have like 2 minutes, and I just want to say this. Some of you are spiritually stuck because you think incorrectly about who God is. Some of you are really angry because some people did some stuff to you. I've had lots of angry years because of things people did to me, only to find out that a lot of who I could have been was robbed by what shouldn't have happened. I didn't just give that stuff to God and pray for those people. Let me tell you something. If you can pray for people that hurt you, then you're probably doing pretty good right now. And you probably have a pretty good sense of who God is and who you are. But some of you need to get the old wound healed so your view of God isn't a rear view mirror view, you know? So in trying to look forward, all you see is your rear view mirror and you're looking back the whole time. If God forgave you, you can forgive them and live inside of the grace and the standard of forgiveness that he's put together for you versus a higher standard of forgiveness that you're holding against you. Would you stand with me for a sec? Wow, God, what a crazy way to end all of this, that there is all of this amazing restoration and reward, but it's still hard work, hard relational work. And thank you, God, that in all of that hard relational work, that we get to see great spiritual intimacy, the greatest of all intimacies, and the intimacy that gives us life, big life, right now. So, Father, anywhere where we are today, where we may be holding somebody hostage, which is really holding ourselves hostage, in allowing their hurt and the pain that someone else created to be bigger than your space in our lives, God, would you help us today? On this day, the day that we have a baptism service, would you help us to give that up over to you, to begin praying for our enemies and for those who persecute us, and to live the big life that you've called us to be people of restoration, to be grace givers. And all God's people said, amen, amen. So there you go. I hope to see you at 5. Be there sharp. You can show up a little early if you want to. It's going to be a really wonderful time, and we look forward to doing all that together. Put your cards in the boxes, and we'll see you in a few hours. God bless you.